Yes.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to the Universalist Church Online, where love is the spirit. We are glad you are here, whether you're joining us from West Hartford, Connecticut, or anywhere in the world. I'm Mike Zanta, one of your representatives on the board. We have Zoom fellowship times for our community throughout the week, as well as before and after worship on Sunday. You can find out more information about these gatherings by getting onto our mailing list through the contact page on our website. Please do read our weekly electronic communications, which have returned to Fridays. They're our best way to keep connected to you. Online worship is a bit different from being in a sanctuary. Technology sometimes fails us. We appreciate your graciousness when that happens. Today's order of service will appear in the chat box or the YouTube description. Today, Tracey, a member of our congregation and one of the directors of the Witness Stones Project, will be our preacher. Lisa will be our liturgist, and Linda will offer readings. We'll have our Zoom fellowship time at about 10:45 after worship ends. If you're attending through Zoom today, please stay online, even if you need to step away for a short break, to join in conversations with one another. Please take a moment to wave hello to one another and to everyone watching our live stream. And now, please take a moment to turn off your email and other apps, put the keyboard away, and settle in for worship.
Drum is a thing since the beginning of time. Drum is a thing that keep me a man.
Lisa, is it letting you unmute yourself? I don't understand. This is weird.
Oh, now I got to unmute myself. Okay. Sorry about, oh wait, yes. Okay. Okay. Please join me in speaking the words of our affirmation, our covenant. It's in the description. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to have the chance to share with you work that for me fits in the category of living our faith in our daily lives. Along with Liz Devine and Denise DeMello, I'm a director of the Witness Stones West Hartford Project. The Witness Stones Project seeks to restore the history and honor the humanity and contributions of the enslaved individuals who in part built our community. Our reflection today is by Linda Scacco. She and Roseanne Austin participated in a Community Witness Stones online course this spring. She studied Kate, Lou, and Caesar, and then wrote a poem about Kate, a woman who in the late 18th century lived a half a mile north of here on North Main Street. Linda.
I have participated in several Witness Stones presentations, learning about the lives of Kate, Lou, and Caesar, and other enslaved people who lived in West Hartford in the 1700s. These stories are powerful testaments to the lives of people who would otherwise be lost to history, if not for the work of the Witness Stones Project. Historian Lawrence N. Powell said, "Public truth-telling is a form of recovery, especially when combined with social action. Witness Stones is the public truth-telling of these enslaved individuals." I've lived in West Hartford for just over 30 years. Over the course of those years, I've become familiar with its roads and its landmarks. I know the names of our schools and other important locations, museums, parks, grocery stores, restaurants. I know the names of both well-traveled streets and many roads less traveled. After participating in the Witness Stones Project, however, I see with new eyes, new understandings. I drive past the old Center Cemetery on North Main Street, where many witness stones have been installed, and I now know the names and stories of many of the enslaved peoples honored there. I now know that many of the streets over which I've traveled for 30 years carry the names of slaveholders, and that many historic houses I pass were once the homes of slaveholders and enslaved peoples. Often I tell others what I've learned about this project, my family and friends, and I see new understandings in their eyes as well. I know that like I have, they have enlarged the narrative of this town. And understanding our history is critical to completing the full narrative. When we shift our gaze in this way, knowing and understanding the true stories of our history, when we lift up the voices of enslaved peoples in West Hartford, when we install stones and write stories and poems, we bear witness to their lives. We say, this happened in our town. We bear witness as a community to a public truth-telling. And as Unitarian Universalists, we honor the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. Sociologists say that there are 3 steps to social change. The first is to bear witness. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, if a person or thing bears witness to something, they show or say that it exists or happened. In an essay entitled "The Power and Strength of Bearing Witness," psychotherapist Shelley Galasso Bonanno says, "A witness assures that our stories are heard, contained, and transcend time. For it can be said that one is never truly forgotten when one is shared and carried in the hearts of others." Once we bear witness to a story, we can take the next steps in order to continue the process towards social change. First, acknowledging our responsibility for our participation in the story, and second, taking steps to restore and repair. How do we take responsibility? We make public statements acknowledging ownership of our actions and the actions of our ancestors, and we apologize. Next, we take steps to repair and make restitution. There are many ways to do this. We enlarge curricula in our schools. We change policy related to housing, employment, policing. We make sure that marginalized people are adequately represented in leadership positions in our schools, our local businesses, and our government. We step out of our comfort zone, out of what Robin DiAngelo calls our white fragility, and reach across the aisle to take the hand of our neighbors who may not look like us. The Witness Stones Project assures that the stories of enslaved peoples in West Hartford will be heard and honored. The Witness Stones Project bears witness to the public truth-telling of these enslaved individuals and is the first step on the road to social change. Thank you.
I believe now that Reverend Joy Christie will be offering us a pastoral prayer.
As we take the time to reflect on all the work of our ancestors, especially those in the Witness Stones Project recognized, may we realize that they have brought us to the community we are today in 2020. And we call upon the holy that has been in their and our midst since our beginnings. As we join in prayer this morning, we call upon that holy within each of us and ask that the holy support and accept our collective prayers and our time of bearing witness. From our Fern Street community, Sally has requested we give prayers of thanksgiving for her continued healing as she begins a new week. Joyce has asked specifically that we hold Judy in our love and care. Judy is in the final stages of her dying, and Joyce and Judy's family need our communal support. Sue asks that we continue to send prayers for her increased strength as her healing continues as well. In our country this day, please lift up all those who are being affected by Hurricane Hannah in Texas and Hurricane Douglas in the Hawaiian Islands. All those who are expressing their support for the Black Lives Matter movement, especially those in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. Finally, as the COVID-19 numbers continue to rise, not only in this country, but in the world, we call to mind all those who are saying goodbye to those who are dying from this pandemic. We also ask prayers for those who are working in labs throughout the world to try to find a vaccine to halt the spread of this virus. May we provide patience, kindness, and ongoing compassion to one another during this time. And may we wear our masks, wash our hands, and be at social distances so that collectively we give life to each other. Please join me now in moments of silence in which we allow the holy to be present to the needs we've just enunciated and to those that are held and unspoken within each of our hearts. May our days in the week ahead be filled with the spirit of love we hold dear. Blessed be, and amen.
We are grateful for all the ways in which you support us and one another, phone calls and Zoom gatherings, getting groceries for those who need them, and preparing for the day when this pandemic crisis comes to a close. Based upon your generosity and appreciation for our outreach through plate sharing, we will continue to share our general offering with organizations that are in harmony with our values and who do work in the world that brings us ever closer to creating the beloved community. Today, we will share our offering with the Witness Stones West Hartford Project. The project's research, storytelling, and civic engagement help us acknowledge the history of slavery in this town, even on the ground where our church stands today. Help to expand the reach of this project to more students and community members. Help to support research for more than 70 individuals who were enslaved here to acknowledge their role in building this town. Under the auspices of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society, help to fund historical signage and the witness stones laid in the cemetery. You can find links for donating to support our congregation and the Witness Stones Project in the chat box and on our website. Please join in singing our doxology. Praise the Lord,
Today's reading is entitled A Poem About Kate, a poem that I wrote after my participation in the Witness Stones project. I know Kate, wife of Lou, mother of Caesar. I want you to know her name. I want you to hear her voice. I want you to know her story. Kate was a strong woman, enslaved by the Stephen Hosmer family from the West Division of Hartford. She was passed down through inheritance to their son George and his wife. Master Hosmer's 1761 account book says that Kate and her husband were worth 90 pounds. They are listed with other important property: a tea kettle, 1 ash barrel, 25 pigs, 32 sheep, 1 wash tub, 8 chairs, 1 hay fork, a toasting iron, 4 horses, 2 Negroes named Lou and Kate, worth 90 pounds. Kate was of value to this family. She would plant and weed the garden. She carried water. She spun wool and made clothing. She helped to care for the 17 Hosmer children. In the evening, when she was away from the master's house, she laughed with friends. She cradled Caesar in her arms and sang songs of freedom to him. She looked at the stars in the night sky, her eyes wide open, and smiled, content, carefree. Kate was a strong and brave woman. She carried a pass when she traveled to the general store to pick up flour for her master's dinner. The pass said, "I am free to travel to the general store." But Kate was not really free. She was bound to her master and his family. Kate could not be sure that her sweet baby, who she cradled in her arms in the evenings, would be with her for all the days and nights of her life. She was not sure that he would be free someday, and she yearned for him to be free. I know Kate, born enslaved, mother of Caesar, wife of Lou, from the West Division of Hartford. I want you to know her name. I want you to hear her story.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We
Thank you so much for that beautiful music. How do we remember? Why do we remember? Next year, we will celebrate the 200th anniversary of our church. A number of us are researching information about past ministers and parishioners to find out what they did, what they believed, and how they practiced their faith. This new information has helped our committee weave a stronger tapestry and has strengthened our connections to our faith community as we learn more about our past. The Witness Stones Project West Hartford is also working to do this connecting work for our community. The project researches West Hartford's history of slavery going back to 1693 and ending in the 1790s. The history becomes increasingly complex as we research and find a history replete with oppression and dehumanization by white residents over people of African descent. Brian Stevenson, the head of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, tells us that when enslaved people were free, the tools of oppression, in particular, the ideas of inferiority that were so much a part of the institution of slavery, did not end. This helps us understand more fully institutionalized racism that can be followed by a through line in our community today. So what does remembering do for a community? Many Connecticut residents didn't know that slavery existed in their towns. Many people think that slavery is only a Southern institution, particular to the 19th century and to growing cotton. Yet slaveholders and enslaved people lived in every Connecticut town in the 18th century. While the names of some of the slaveholders have been glorified and remembered through the naming of streets and buildings, those of the enslaved are mostly lost to history. The Witness Stones Project is restoring the stories and the names of the enslaved. We research, remember, and retell the stories and write a more accurate account of the chosen English settlement and forced African settlement of this town. Retelling is really a practice. Personal stories are powerful. Linda expressed the longing for story in her poem. I want you to know her name. I want you to hear her voice. I want you to know her story. The stories of Bristow and George are calling too. You may have heard the name Bristow. In the old Center Cemetery, his is the only gravestone of somebody who was enslaved in this town. Even though we know more than 70 people, men, women, and children, were enslaved here. Okay, now I'm missing my script, Lena. So let's see if I can get to it. Got it. Here on his gravestone, you see his name is Bristol. His name was spelled 5 different ways. Just that tells a story that spelling his name. In his manumission paper, the paper which gave him freedom from the hookers, his name was spelled with a W. We believe he would have known at least 50 other enslaved people in a population of 150 families in West Hartford during his lifetime. We surmise that he knew Lou, Kate, and Caesar, and George. Bristow was enslaved here by Thomas Hart and Sarah Hooker. We know that before 1775, Bristow was allowed to work for others and to save some of those wages. In 1775, when Thomas Hart Hooker was getting ready to go fight after the battles at Lexington and Concord, when colonists began their war for independence, he allowed Bristow to buy his freedom for 60 pounds, the equivalent of $13,000 today. At that time, Bristow, this captive, who went free, was 44 years old. We know Bristow went on to buy land in Bristol. He owned a mill on his 6 acres of land. He left a will. In it, he made sure that he would have a gravestone. Bristow willed his worldly property to the children of Thomas Hart and Sarah Whitman Hooker. What kind of heart did that take? Brian Stevenson says, when you think about all of the brutality and violence and abuse that Black people suffered, and they still were willing to live in harmony with those who had abused them, it says something remarkable about the power of we. They believed in an America, and they got no credit for that. Imagine living in a community that once enslaved you. And I might not be telling you this story without that gravestone. We might not know Bristow's story if his gravestone hadn't broken and fallen to the ground in 2003. Sometimes it is the breaking that lets the light shine in. When his gravestone cracked, a group of people in the West Hartford African American Social and Cultural Organization purchased a new stone and took the opportunity to do more research to more fully retell Bristow's story. For the first 189 years that the gravestone stood in the old burial ground, his story was seldom told. Yet this 2003 retelling led to a public campaign to name the town's new middle school after him. In 2005, West Hartford's Board of Education named the new middle school after an enslaved resident who bought his freedom. This shines a light on Bristow's life in slavery and his freedom and the heritage of slavery and freedom in our town. Yet witnessing Bristow is a continual process. How do we keep him in our memory when we bike by the old Center Cemetery, when we hear the name of the school, and when we drive by the Sarah Whitman Hooker House on New Britain Avenue? Witnessing Bristow reminds us that the economy of our colonial town was based on slavery. Witnessing Bristow reminds us that the religious and moral core of this colonial town was built by the first 2 ministers of the Congregational Church, both slaveholders. Witnessing Bristow reminds us that his legacy of oppression is still with us today. We are reminded in Issei Barnwell's song, We Are, that the people we research are family members, and we work to humanize them. Barnwell says, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Our project tries to recreate the breadth of our ancestors in saying their names and retelling their stories. When people who are protesting in the streets still today remind us to say her name, Breonna Taylor, and say his name, George Floyd, they are saying that we need to continue to remember and witness their lives to remind ourselves of the continued struggle for freedom and justice. The story of slavery in West Hartford continues in 2020. On July 14th, just 2 weeks ago, members of the First Church met to discuss the piece of land right outside their front door called Goodman Green. In 1747, Timothy Goodman gave that land, a piece of his farm, to the church as a parade ground forever. Now the town leases it from the church for $1 a year. In 2018, the Witness Stones Project discovered that Timothy Goodman was a slaveholder. He enslaved a man named George. Goodman was able to deed this land to the church in part because of the wealth he amassed enslaving this man, George. Should Goodman be honored in this way? In the first church meeting in July, Dorothy Stone, a 90-year-old descendant of Timothy Goodman, expressed her desire for the name to be changed, recognizing the need to acknowledge, apologize, restore, and repair. These 3 stories of Kate, Bristow, and George help us shift our gaze. They help us tell stories that provide a more complicated picture of what actually happened here in the 18th century. When we put the first witness stone for George and Chris in the ground in 2018, Dr. Booker DeVaughn, an African-American man who has lived in West Hartford for over 20 years, who did much of the research on Bristow, said, "Now I feel like I belong in this community." Powerful words and emotions. So where can you tell the stories, and how many times? Can we make it a practice to, as John Lewis would say, make good trouble by budging people out of their narratives of progress and equality in their history narratives? How did laws requiring enslaved people to carry passes connect to police harassing Black drivers? How does the legacy of slavery relate to imagining the worst when two young men are selling Conard football fundraising cards? How does the legacy of slavery affect the willingness to allow segregation in housing and schools in a town where slavery officially ended over 200 years ago? For you, can studying the history of slavery here weave stronger connections to the past and to each other? The Witness Stones Project tells us that learning these stories can actually weave a sense of community here as we take on the process of witnessing, repairing, and restoring. And for our church, we will think about the legacy of our founding, the stories of the ministers, and the faith church members practiced. Will they be stories that confirm who we are or that make us question who we are? Will we as a congregation share these stories? Can they serve to weave a stronger sense of community here as we witness, repair, and restore? As I close, I want you to listen to the names read by members of the congregation of 9 individuals whose stones will be permanently placed in the Old Center Cemetery this summer. This will bring the number of stones to 21.
Sarah Coffey lived to age 97. She was born in 1686 and lived till 1783. She may have been born in West Africa. The name Coffey comes from the Akan word used to name people who were born on Fridays. I imagine that she and Coffey, who died of old age in 1778, 8 years before she did, that they kept the stories in this town. I imagine she kept the stories of her homeland. I imagine she lived with Coffey, a man who was also enslaved by Dr. Daniel Hooker. She was more than 40 years older than those who enslaved her, so I imagine that relationship. I imagine, as he was a doctor, that she was a nurse to some of the people he took care of. She could have known at least 40 others of African descent living in this town. She lived right to the south of the old mill pond where the bridge is being replaced, about a half-mile from our church. I imagine that she knew and participated in the community gatherings selecting the Negro governors, that she knew of Jude, who ran away, and that she knew Bristow, who bought his freedom when she was 88. I imagine she bristled under the oppression of slavery and at the same time built a world of her own to survive. Sarah Coffey, we say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that, in part, this town was built by you.
Coffey, born about 1685 and died in 1778, may have been born in Africa and suffered the Middle Passage. He and Sarah must have been the holders of many stories. He probably managed the farm of his enslavers, Dr. Daniel and Mary Sedgwick Hooker III. Coffey, we say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that in part, this town was built by you.
Born in 1756 and died in 1767, Greenville was enslaved by the second minister, Reverend Nathaniel Hooker, and Ruth Skinner Hooker. He lived in the area of 9 South Main Street. Greenville, today we remember your name and what you did to help build this town.
York was born in New London. John Prentice documented him as Irene's boy and Simone's brother. He promised York his freedom at age 35. We don't think he was ever freed by Anne Prentice and Thomas Hosmer in the West Division. He took care of the horses, oxen, sheep, and swine, picked apples, grew and harvested tobacco, corn, and hay. Simone and York lived in this same household on North Main Street and were siblings. York, we say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that, in part, this town was built by you.
Lou was born in 1720 and baptized in 1754. Lou was Cesar's father. He was a member in full communion at the Fourth Church of Hartford. Lou was enslaved by Stephen Hosmer, 1703 to 1761, and George Hosmer, 1739 to an undisclosed date, at 253 North Main Street. He was forced to help manage Hosmer's 300 acres and care for their 17 children, as well as his own son, Cesar. Lou, we say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that in part, this town was built by you.
Kate and Lou were listed as property in Stephen Hosmer's 1703 to 1761 inventory. We think she was the mother of Caesar, and we know from church records that Lou was his father. She must have had grave worries about keeping her family together, being enslaved by George Hosmer. Kate, we say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that in part this town was built by you.
Cesar was the child of Lou and Kate. Cesar was baptized in 1763. Cesar was born into slavery, and his name probably came from his slaveholder, not his parents. His parents must have worried that he might have been separated from their family before he grew up. He might have been freed, Cesar. We say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that in part this town was built by you.
Ned was baptized in 1742 at age 11, on the same date as enslaver John Whitman's son. John Hosmer used Ned to pay off a debt to John Whitman in 1740 by trading this 9-year-old boy, as documented in Whitman's account book. Ned was enslaved with Reuben and Ben. Ned, today we remember your name and what you did to help build this town.
Reuben was baptized in 1770. When he lived in the West Division, there were at least 35 enslaved people living in this town. Being enslaved by the merchant John Whitman meant he may have traveled more than others and seen more of the world. We also know Reuben earned wages from John Hosmer. Reuben, we say your name, we honor your life, and we remember that in part, this town was built by you.
Let us speak together our unison benediction. Engage in the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.